Good evening. We are very sorry for this little bit of delay. Welcome to this GUNi-TEFCE webinar. I am Victoria Gómez, Project Officer at GUNi, and I will be the facilitator today. I would like to start saying that at GUNi we are delighted to host this webinar and to see that it has attracted so much attention there are participants from many different countries, and surely this will enrich a lot our discussions. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. Today we will be talking about community engagement, a topic that, although it is certainly not new, it is gaining more and more emphasis and attention. The TEFCE project was conceived in this context with the objective of developing a framework for community engagement in higher education to support universities in institutionalizing their cooperations with communities and to inform policymakers on the value of such cooperations, collaborations, and engagement. Today, we will have three speakers. Our first speaker will be Josep Maria Vilalta. He is the director of the GUNi Network and executive secretary of the Association of Catalan Public Universities. He will be giving us a little bit of context on community engagement in higher education and tell us a little bit about the work of GUNi on those lines. Our second speaker will be Thomas Farnell. He is a policy expert at the Institute for the Development of Education in Croatia and one of the coordinators of the TEFCE project. And he will be explaining to us the toolbox for community engagement that has been developed in the framework of the TEFCE project in the last 2 years of very intense work. And finally, our third speaker will be Bojana Culum. She is an associate professor at the University of Rijeka, and she will be sharing with us the experience of piloting the TEFCE Toolbox at her university. Today, we will be leaving the QA and discussion time for the end after all the presentations are finished. If you have questions, that I hope you do, and I'm sure that you will do, please send them via the chat box in the right side of your screens. And if you wish, you can also add the name of the speaker to whom you would like to address your question. Anyways, please feel free to use the chat to interact with other participants or comment on what the speakers are saying. And one last note before giving the floor to the first speaker, I would like to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and that it will be available on the GUNi and TEFCE websites soon after today, in the coming days. And yeah, I will now give the floor to our first speaker, Josep Maria Vilalta. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Victoria.
So you can start whenever you want.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria.
Thank you.
Thank you to the whole TEFCE project team and to the whole GUNi team for the organization of this webinar. It's really a pleasure to be today with all of you sharing ideas about community engagement and social responsibility. I'll try to make just a really short introduction to the theme, as Victoria was saying a moment ago, to the concepts of community engagement and social responsibility in higher education. So I'll last at most 10 minutes trying to show you and share with you some ideas. So what do you mean by engaged university or social responsibility? Two concepts that are, of course, related to each other. I would say maybe in a kind of a provocative way, we could say that the most important function of universities are, of course, good and relevant teaching and good and relevant research. That's real, that we agree in that. But at this moment, at this particular moment, should we change the way we provide teaching and learning? Should we change the way we do research? Should we change institutional strategies at higher education level? These are questions that arise in these special times when we could say that we are transiting from, let's say, an age of changes to a really change of age. here you can find some ideas, some characteristics of this new era that we are entering on. I'm just mentioning some ideas as we don't have time to go in depth, but as you know, powerful technical and scientific advances in the last years, the globalization of the economy, the globalization of societies, the environmental crisis. We are entering, as you know, in a new knowledge-intensive society. The world of work is, as you know as well, in full transformation in all countries. And we are also facing with so many social and political challenges. So referring to higher education context, all these changes are transforming universities as well and are, let's say, provoking an answer from higher education institutions. First of all, just mentioning about knowledge society, here we have some quotes from a Spanish philosopher, Daniel Innerarity, that give us some interesting ideas about this knowledge society. So in terms of referring to higher education institutions, it's clear that we need to open universities to society. There are at the same time growing expectations of society regarding universities. So society expects more from higher education institutions. And we also need science cooperation and higher education cooperation at global level, not only at local level between some institutions, but also at global level. But at the same time, as I wrote here, universities in this context of knowledge society lose the monopoly of knowledge at this time. And we are still very much based at national or regional perspective and focusing very much on competition between us, between institutions. So here we have a tension, a clear tension between inside every university between the local and the global. So universities are facing with this, let's say, dual answering, trying to answer, let's say, to global needs, trying to the advancing of science, for instance, the advance of knowledge at global level, at universal level. But at the same time, universities have to face and have to respond to local needs, to government expectations, to society expectations, and so on. So that's a difficult, let's say, tension between giving answers locally and globally. And because of that, maybe some of you know, in GUNi, we decided to dedicate our sixth world report to this topic, to this tension between local and global. And we titled this Towards a Socially Responsible University, Balancing the Global with the Local. So that's our sixth world report at GUNi. There are on the last years a renewed emphasis on responsibility and engagement in higher education. Here you have some information that most of you for sure know about European Commission position, trying to identify community engagement as one of the desirable mechanisms by which European universities should seek to promote their societal purposes. And here you have a list. It's not exactly a list of everything, but that's at least some of the answers that you can experience on last year's. For instance, the new paradigm of the responsible research and innovation, the science with and for society, the open science, the citizen science, the community-based learning. We could add, for instance, all the knowledge diplomacy, and of course, the 2030 agenda of the United Nations. So in the last, we could say last decade, there is a progressive institutionalization of social responsibility and engagement in universities. We could say that going from marginal reports at university level to more institution-wide strategies. At the same time, there is more progressive integration of social responsibility in mission of the institutions, on the strategies, on the programs, and on the specific projects. And generally, we can see a university that looks that used to look inwards to a university that looks more all around, that tries to think global and act local. What about teaching and learning? So we've been talking about that. We can see some movements. Here you have a list on that. New curriculum agenda, more emphasis on competences, a new pedagogy for engaged learning, transdisciplinary approaches, so going beyond the rigid academic structures, the departments, the silos, so trying to go for a new curriculum according to the societal problems, and also the incentivization of societally engaged teaching. So here we have some examples of this renewed emphasis on responsibility. What about research and innovation? Here we have these emerging concepts as we have referred a moment ago: responsible research and innovation, open science, and so on. With these key, let's say, messages or concepts of anticipation, reflexivity, inclusiveness, and responsiveness. At the same time, we all know that we have a global agenda called the Agenda 2030, as you know, that give us a clear idea for institutions on the common objectives for the coming years. As you know, is it difficult to make it possible? And we need three essential ingredients: political will, participation of all actors, and knowledge. So here, again, universities has a key position, a key role to fulfill the Agenda 2030. In the higher education field, universities are becoming international, but still without adequate answers and organized with national perspective. Are the networks of universities an adequate way, or can we tackle it with global universities? Not at this moment, not too successful so far. So there is, again, this tension that I referred before between the local and the global. What about GUNi on this Agenda 2030? As you maybe know, some of you know GUNi, so you know that we decided to put the agenda in our strategy on the last year since 2016, and we decided to organize more or less every 2 years an international conference on sustainable development goals. So we organized the first one in 2017, and the second one, it was celebrated just some months ago. We also are launching some projects and publications on aspects like the execution implementation of SDGs, or for instance on climate change. And we also launch a group of experts in SDGs and higher education. So here there is some examples that GUNi is trying to tackle this Agenda 2030 relating with higher education. And let me just say some final remarks. First of all, social responsibility and university engagement is a growing strategic focus for higher education institutions. But the change of age that we were referring a moment ago requires to redefine universities. We have to redefine universities to be more engaged with society, to be more responsible with societal problems. Of course, this tension between local and global is very present. And I would say that only universities with this good tension between global and local, vision and mission, can resolve the tension. At the same time, a more engaged university requires new focus of higher education and research policies from governments. So we need to think about, or governments need to think about, how to finance universities in order to be more engaged with society. They need to think about new incentives, far more than, let's say, the classical ones, as is publishing papers and so on. And we need a new accountability way of evaluating universities, a new data and a new way of accountability. And as at a global scale, the agenda, as we have seen a moment ago, the Agenda 2030 is a real catalyst for universities at a global level. So here there are some remarks that I would like to mention before entering to the toolbox from the TEFCE project. And I just want to finish, let me finish with being a gratitude to one of our colleagues, who is Professor Paul Beneworth. I would like to make a special tribute to him. Paul, as you know, some of you know, was really involved with the TEFCE project and with areas like community engagement of higher education and social responsibility. And as you know, he passed some weeks ago. We miss you all, Paul, and thanks so much for your example and for your humanity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your presentation. Paul was one of the leading experts in community engagement and higher education, and I'm sure that many people learned and got inspired by his ideas and his research, and we will surely miss him a lot. I would like now to invite Thomas to make his presentation on the toolbox. As Josep Maria was mentioning in his presentation, university community engagement is definitely a growing strategic focus for higher education institutions. So let's see how the TEFCE project has tackled this growing emphasis, and in that sense, the need also to develop a common framework through the toolbox. So Thomas, whenever you want, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are located. Over here, we've had registrations from 43 different countries and many continents, so we're really pleased to have so much interest in our work. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. So my name is Thomas Farnell. I'm leading the team of the project entitled Towards a European Framework for Community Engagement in Higher Education, or TEFCE for short. And my presentation is going to be about this toolbox that we have developed for community engagement in higher education through our project. So I want to explain why we did this, how we did it, and who it's intended for. So a couple of words about the project at the beginning. So it's funded by the European Commission through the Erasmus Plus program. And the objective is for us to develop some innovative tools or policy tools that could help universities, and perhaps even at the transnational level, at the European level, develop tools that could help support, monitor, and assess community engagement of universities. This is who we are. I mean, I won't read all the names, but we are, there's 5 universities. We are a total of 12 partners from 8 countries, 5 universities from Germany, the Netherlands, Croatia, Ireland, and Belgium. We also have 4 partners from local and regional government, and 3 higher education networks involved in the project. And policy background, well, in fact, Josep Maria has given a really good overview of the background, so I can be quite quick here. But of course, the starting point of our project is the 3rd mission of higher education. So as Josep Maria mentioned, so classically, higher education is understood as having the core missions of teaching and research. But in the last decade, there's obviously been a lot of talk about this 3rd mission, which is universities' contribution to society. But in practice, those conversations about the 3rd mission tend to go in the direction of the economic impact and significance of universities. So, for example, about innovation, technology transfer, human capital, labor market relevance, and so on, and not about the range of other ways that universities contribute to society in ways that are not only economic. So in that sense, our starting point is that community engagement, and we'll come back to what exactly we mean by that in a minute, is an integral part of the 3rd mission, but it's so far been marginalized in public policy debates. But as Josep Maria mentioned, this is changing, and an argument can be made that in the last decade especially, there's been a lot more talk about the range of different ways in which universities can address societal needs in a much broader and holistic way than just the kind of narrow economic perspective. And Josep Maria mentioned a lot of the things that I mentioned on my slide now. So Horizon 2020 has its own had its own Science With and For Society program, which had amazing initiatives through the UN Sustainable Development Goals as well. Countries such as the UK and Ireland have really gone very far in having policy frameworks and supporting frameworks for community engagement. So so it's changing, and this is why this project, we believe, it is relevant now. Okay, definitions. This is a tricky one because if we are from 43 different countries, what's for sure is that there's probably not a direct translation of community engagement in all of your languages. I was talking to people this week about how would you translate community engagement into French, and it wasn't very clear how we would do that. In Canada, they have engagement communautaire, but in France, it's not really, that wouldn't really work. In Spain, it's probably, and Latin America, it's probably more something more along the lines of responsabilidad social universitaria, and so on and so forth. So there's a range of different definitions around the world for what we are actually talking about. So what we decided to do is to define our terms at the beginning of the project. So what we're talking about when we speak about community engagement, it's about how universities address societal needs in partnership with their external communities. And again, to be more precise, we have to define the three key terms that we're using here. So by community, we mean as broad as possible. So maybe an understanding of community engagement is local community. We're thinking in much broader terms. We're using this idea of communities of place, identity, and interest. So basically, this could range from government, business, civil society, and citizens, and not just the local, but also up to the global level, also, as Josep Maria neatly mentioned in his presentation. Engagement, in short, means about a university undertaking joint activities with external actors, external communities, in a way that's mutually beneficial. So the idea of mutual benefit here is absolutely crucial. So it can't just be about a university helping others. There has to be a mutual benefit both to the university and to the communities involved. Finally, in terms of what we mean by societal needs, again, it's possible to interpret, let's say, a community engagement in some contexts as being primarily about social justice and addressing social inequality and democratic values, which is indeed what it's also about. But we also want to broaden this so that we don't exclude different ways in which universities can engage with their communities in different ways on different topics. So we are really broadening the idea that it can be about a range of different societal needs, about the different factors that influence quality of life in society. Okay, so if we accept the argument that it's becoming increasingly prominent as a topic in policy, that community engagement is becoming increasingly prominent, then if you're a policymaker or a university manager, you're going to ask, okay, how do we measure that? So how can we demonstrate that we're meeting our policy goals, that we are indeed succeeding at being community engaged? And so the question of measurement then naturally comes up. And the typical way in which we do this, and especially in higher education, is that you first define a range of guidelines, standards, indicators, and targets, and then you use different ways in which to measure whether the performance is indeed in line with those. So you have accreditations, audits, benchmarking, evaluation, and that's all good. Again, an argument could be made that in the last few decades, there's been increasingly amount of focus on metrics, so on quantitative ways of measuring things rather than qualitative, and an emphasis on ranking, especially in higher education. And a couple of years ago, I was thinking, there's no way someone's going to make a ranking for community engagement. But then the Times Higher Education came up with something close to that, which is their rankings, their so-called impact rankings, which is rankings of universities and the extent on how they contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And our project does not think that that's a good way to go for this specific topic. So our then challenge then, and what we had to do is to see how can we find a kind of framework that's an alternative to this idea of measurement, and to kind of find a different approach to this topic. So then our starting point was, let's just drop the search for perfect quantitative indicators of community engagement and instead opt for a more qualitative approach. Secondly, we reject the logic of ranking and competitive benchmarking as being irrelevant. I mean, in general, I mean, that's my personal view, but especially for the area of community engagement, because community engagement is so multifaceted and context-specific by nature. So there's literally no value or point, we would argue, in comparing how community engaged is a university in central London to how community engaged is a university in a rural part of Spain or Croatia, because those comparisons do not make any sense, because we have different contexts, different communities, different societal needs, different capacities, different institutional missions, and such like. So this idea of let's compare and rank and compare and benchmark performance, to us does not make sense for this area of community engagement. Thirdly, we want to avoid whatever we develop to become just another self-assessment tool that gets stuck in a university office somewhere, and instead encourage a more participative process where it's about dialogue between different actors to reach certain conclusions. And finally, we're not the first to be doing this. So there's been a lot that's been done in fact, for decades on community engagement and how to assess it. And we acknowledge previous tools, and we're learning from them, and we want to learn from them and go further and see if we can develop a slightly different approach. And in that sense, let me just also then mention some of the really very relevant ones that have in many ways inspired our work and kind of informed our work, and see how we can develop in different directions. These are some of the initiatives in the last few decades that have been that have either developed their own frameworks to support community engagement, or that are really are there to support community engaged actors internationally. Okay, so the toolbox. What is the TEFCE Toolbox? The purpose is to serve, firstly, as a reference tool for universities, external communities, and policymakers to better understand what community engagement means. So what are the different dimensions of community engagement? And secondly, as a more practical tool for universities to determine how well they are performing in different aspects of community engagement and how they can improve. And how do we develop it? Well, I mean, basically, it was a really interesting, it's been over the last 18 months, almost 2 years. It's been a co-creation process. So in total, it's involved about 170 participants from 8 countries. Initially, there was a group of 5 of us who developed the initial prototype and method. And then over a piloting stage of a year and discussions, we really didn't even, it was more than fine-tuning the toolbox. We actually developed whole new sections of it for it to be what it's become today. Before we started developing the toolbox itself, we said, okay, whatever we develop, we need to ensure that it's in line with 4 principles. The first is that it has to be about authenticity of engagement. Now, this is slightly, it's a critical approach that we're taking. I wouldn't say it's controversial, but it's very critical. So what we're saying here is that there are initiatives that maybe university managers would say, oh, look how engaged we are and look how we're helping the community, but the community involved would not really share that opinion, that it's that valuable to them. So that there's superficial kinds of engagement, and there's very developed kinds of engagement. There's one directional engagement. There's on the other hand mutually beneficial engagement and such like. So we wanted to make sure that we capture what engagement should really be about. Secondly, empowerment of individuals. It's a big word, empowerment, obviously, but what we wanted here is that whatever we develop, we would like it to be relevant to individuals who are involved in community engagement, so that they feel that this really brings value to them as a tool, and that the toolbox, when it's applied, provides recognition of the good things that are done in community engagement and of good practices that take place. So not just, again, about a tick box exercise, but about something that's meaningful to individuals involved. Thirdly, and closely related to this, Again, that it doesn't get stuck in an administrative office somewhere in a university, but that it's a process that involves discussions, participative discussions between a range of different actors, where we have bottom-up and both top-down coming together. So university management, but also community engaged practitioners, community representatives involved in that process together. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, again, this should be about being a learning journey for an institution rather than a benchmarking or of course, a ranking exercise. So the toolbox, since it's a toolbox, it has different tools, and we have 4 tools. The first is dimensions of community engagement. The second is about different levels of community engagement. The third is about synthesizing the results of everything and creating an institutional community engagement heat map. And the fourth is a self-reflective tool called a slip dot analysis. What on earth does that mean? We'll find out in a couple of seconds. Okay, so the tool number 1, this is our framework based on a pretty extensive literature review about what we consider to be the 7 core dimensions of community engagement. And for each of those core dimensions, we have a total of 20, what we're calling sub-dimensions of what we consider to be the elements of a community engaged university. I won't go here in detail since we don't have much time, but of course, we're talking about teaching and learning. So to what extent study programs reflect societal needs, and to what extent community-based learning, service learning is incorporated into the university. Research, in terms of to what extent there's research about communities and research with communities. Service and knowledge exchange is about to what extent academic staff outside their core teaching and research are also involved in help supporting external communities and empowering them. Same thing for students, to what extent do students outside their core learning activities also organize their own initiatives for community engagement. And management is about to what extent the institution as a whole has partnerships with external communities. The last 2 are about to what extent there is an environment at the university that's conducive to community engagement. The second tool goes deeper, and that's about, for each of the 20 sub-dimensions of engagement, we created descriptors of the different levels of engagement. So here we're coming back to that idea of what is authentic community engagement and kind of less authentic, or community engagement that needs to be further improved in order to be even more effective. And here, just one example, just to show you what it looks like. So we've taken community-based learning. So we have 5 different levels. We don't go into levels 2 and 4. So we just have 3 descriptors for levels 1, 3, and 5, saying level 1, the community-based learning at the university, it exists and it does benefit students a lot, but we don't really have evidence of what impact this has or what outcomes there are for the community. Level 3, it has demonstrated that it really does have impact for or good outcomes for students and for community partners. And level 5 is that it actually builds capacities of community partners and brings equal benefits to the university, students, and communities as well. So that's just to give an illustration of how the toolbox works and the different levels that we define. Okay, heat map. It's getting a bit complicated. There's not much time, so I'll try and make it clear. Basically, once you've done that whole process for the 20 different dimensions, obviously you need to kind of synthesize that a bit for it to be clear. So what we're doing is that we synthesize the results by considering the following characteristics. So you've collected practices about what you're doing at the university in terms of community engagement. You're first then assessing to what extent do we have authentic community engagement in place? And then we also want to see to what extent what kind of societal needs are we addressing with this? What kind of communities are we engaging with? To what extent is this widespread at the institution or really focused in 1 or 2 departments? And is this sustainable, what we're doing, or is it kind of through projects with very limited funding, which is going to run out? And we try and use a color scale to do that. Again, not much time to go into the details here, but let me just take one example on this scale. So for example, number 2, societal needs addressed. So again, you could have interesting engagement with external actors, but maybe the societal needs you're addressing are about labor market needs in industry, and that's good. But obviously it's even more engaged if you're addressing issues such as grand challenges, climate change, local social needs. It's more difficult to address those issues. It takes more resources to address those issues than to engage with communities that are easier to engage with. So number 3 as well, again, you could be engaged with real resource institutions, hospitals, businesses, governments, or there's also low resource partners such as schools, NGOs, social enterprises, citizens, which takes a lot more effort to do. So again, we're looking at a difference between lower levels of engagement and higher levels of engagement based on that scale. I can't go into all the details here, but obviously maybe we could discuss that a bit later. So what you would get at the end of the day, once you apply that part of the toolbox, then you would have this for your institution saying, where are the areas where we are really good and where are the areas where you can improve? So just taking one example here, based on all the practices that you collect in that process, you see that in teaching and learning, you have a huge range of really relevant programs for society, community-based learning, and that's all really good. But if you look under embedded, you see there's not much going on there. So it means it's probably only focused in 1 or 2 departments and not at all in other departments at the university. And that you could maybe engage with a broader range of communities rather than the communities that you're engaging with now. So you could improve in those areas, okay? So that's the idea, but obviously it's quite complicated. So a longer presentation would be maybe clearer, but I hope you get the gist of it. Finally, slip dot. What is a slip dot? We invented that term. I think I invented it, but we invented it as a group, and it's a SWOT analysis without the weakness. So you see, it's so we've taken out weakness because we don't like talking about weaknesses in here, but we replace weakness with areas of lower intensity and areas with potential for development. So obviously, an area of strength, that's very clear. Area of lower intensity means maybe there's areas of community engagement that you don't have the capacity to be doing right now, or honestly, you don't have the interest because that's not in line with your institutional mission. But areas with potential for development are the areas where you think in the next 5 to 10 years you should be improving. And obviously, opportunities and threats means you're not, as an institution or as academics or as students, operating in a vacuum. There's external factors that are helping you to be engaged, and probably even more that are hindering you in that process as well. So it's important at the end of the entire toolbox process to map out these areas. In practice, what happens is that this is more or less a 6-month process. It involves a university setting up a team. There's maybe a core team of 3 to 4 people and an extended team of, let's say, 10 to 15 who would start an initial discussion based on the tool number 1 about, okay, mapping out what we think we're doing at the university. It involves quite a long stage of evidence collection. So it is, in that sense, quite resource intensive. We have to be clear here. In each of the 4 pilot universities, which we'll hear about in a minute, we're talking about between 25 and 50 practices were so case studies in a way were collected in that process. And then you do make the analysis using the levels and the heat map. You have the self-reflection, which is a real participative discussion between the community, the university, and the community engaged academics and students. And then you have a report, which is a basis for then your further improvements. So to end this, sorry for the slightly going over time here, but the benefits that we think this toolbox brings is demonstrating, so you're demonstrating the value of what the university brings to communities and vice versa, what the community brings to the university. In practice, we've also seen that it really does support intrinsic motivation of community engaged staff, students, and external partners by recognizing and showcasing everything they're doing well. And what we've actually found out in practice is that a lot of the stuff that gets done that's amazing, no one really knows about it, or at least not at the management level of the university, and people just do it because they're really motivated to do it. So providing this kind of institutional level recognition is important. And finally, you really do have then a basis for planning improvements to how to further be community engaged. Okay, the potential of the TEFCE Toolbox in the grand scheme of things in the long term, this is our kind of ambitious view of what this could become. So what we've proven is that the toolbox can be implemented in different institutional and local contexts, and we think it's pretty robust. And in that sense, we believe that it has a potential to become a European framework for community engagement in higher education, and we are in fact advocating through a range of ways to see whether that could be done in the next 5 to 10 years. Both from directly with the European Commission, but then if that doesn't work, we can also go bottom up as well. So we have a range of options available, and maybe it doesn't even need to be European, it could be beyond Europe as well. So that's the end of my presentation. There's some more information on what we're doing. The toolbox is not yet publicly available, but there's a lot of information on what we're doing on our website and on Twitter. I didn't know that Josep Maria had this slide, so in fact I wanted to also add my own notes on this. So Paul Benneworth, we've worked very closely together, him and I, and the whole project over the last 3 years. And yeah, he provided a central part of this project, and the intellectual rigor and the passion that we needed to develop all of this was really thanks to Paul, and he should have been here today presenting all of this with us, but unfortunately he's not. So we want to dedicate all our work on the project to Paul and to his memory. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions in the discussion. Victoria?
Thank you so much, Thomas, for this very comprehensive presentation on the toolbox. Its characteristics, dimension, its added value. I see we have many interesting questions and comments on the chat, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion afterwards. And I think by now we are also interested already knowing the experience of the University of Rijeka in piloting the toolbox, right? So I will be giving the floor to Bojana. She will be here in just a couple of seconds. Hi, Bojana.
Hi, Victoria. Hi, everyone.
Thank you. So you can take the floor whenever you want. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you everyone for organizing this event. And I want to say hello to everyone out there in the audience. And I really do appreciate your time being here with us. Now that you've heard this sort of broader conceptual and policy framework given by Josep Maria and this broader project context given by Thomas, I'm actually here to lead you through what we purposefully call the experiential learning journey of piloting the TEFCE Toolbox. And this learning journey in the title is here also with the purpose of sort of remembering Paul being here on us in this project, and this concept of learning journey of the university participating in this process was something that he was very passionate about, and he strongly advocated this paradigm of learning journey, right, sort of at the opposite side of the benchmarking and comparisons, and not to mention rankings as well. I know that we have participants from all over the world, so just briefly let me introduce you to the University of Rijeka. It is quite a young university, founded in 1973, but throughout this particularly past decade, it has really matured into a modern European university, which really strives to support both social and economic development, not only of the city of Rijeka, where the university lives, but in the wider region as well. You can see by the number, if it's a small or a large university in comparison to your own university. There are 17,500 students, 1,300 academics, and there are more than 160 accredited study programs on undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level. Just to share with you information that the University of Rijeka was not the only university in the project that was going through this learning journey of piloting process. There were 3 more universities: a technical university in Dresden, in Germany, Twente in Netherlands, and in Dublin, in Ireland. And all of those processes were participatory in their own way, but all of them were involving having focus groups with various actors from the university management, academic and non-academic staff, students, and members of community organizations, institutions, and even local authorities at some cases. So we are kind of quite sort of comfortable with this statement of ours that after all those 4 piloting processes, we are quite sure that the quality of the TEFCE Toolbox framework that we have been developing and are still working on it is, let's say, confirmed. One thing that I want to also just sort of place in a context is why it was so important for the University of Rijeka to be a part of this whole process is because the mission of the university really nicely leans to the very core principle of the whole idea behind the TEFCE and community engagement, and that is impact on our society that can be, reached out in so many different innovative ways. We really do believe that by participating in this project and by running this whole piloting process, we can achieve a new balance in recognizing and rewarding academics as individuals, but also being recognized and awarded as a university, as an institution, and that can lead actually to diversifying university outcomes and promoting really different and flexible academic career paths. And what we are really we are really careful about how to sort of have this toolbox integrated within the issue of quality. So we are really fond of working a lot and investing a lot in terms of balancing the individual and team performance in all academic pillars, right? Teaching, research, innovation, and serving the society as well. So let me guide you now actually through some practicalities, because I really think that might be helpful for our audience. So this part of the piloting process at the University of Rijeka lasted for 2 months, but we are still in a finalizing phase of our institutional report. And it was quite an challenging time for us to do the piloting report, because you're going to see from the dates that it was happening throughout the 2 months of more or less official summer vacation in Croatia. So we were quite interested as well to see whether we could make it in that period of time. It was sort of a project timeline issue. And we set up an open call, and the university rector actually invited all the academics at the university to join us and to join this project by sharing their own engaged practices, whether in their own teaching, research, or any other outreach capacity. And within those 2 months, those 2 summer months, we actually received around 60 different practices, and were very much overwhelmed by that success. And for the purpose of writing a piloting report, we analyzed 45 practices within the framework of all 7-dimension and 21 sub-dimension. At a time, this is how the heat map looked like, and you saw from the Thomas presentation that it has changed over time. But when we were doing piloting in September 2019, this was the heat map, and this part was also piloted only at the University of Rijeka, because we wanted to test it, bits and bytes of the methodology as well, throughout piloting at different universities. So we did heat map at the University of Rijeka after every sub-dimension. It ended up proving not to be actually sort of a smart way to continue, because we figured it out that a more coherent, substantial, more robust heat map can actually be given for each dimension, having in mind everything written, within each sub-dimension. We set up a piloting visit for 2 days in September 2019, and we had a peer review team of 4 external experts that were our guests at the university for those 2 days. And together with the Rijeka piloting team, that the core team consisted of 4 people, and there was a larger team of 20 people. We set up different kind of presentations, discussion groups, and focus groups with all relevant actors included. So students, academic and non-academic staff, and representatives of external communities. And in our case, the rector was there the whole time. I'm going to show you just some of the examples of practice that that are already taking place at the University of Rijeka and that were part of the piloting report. For one, these are our research and development centers that are designed actually to particularly cherish that moment of knowledge transfer and in a way so that we really sending out a message of acknowledging various forms of university community collaborations. There are examples, for example, in related with teaching. So there is a course, Work Placements in Culture, and within this course, students can get ECTS points for 86 hours of their direct engagement in various cultural institutions in the city of Rijeka. University of Rijeka is a member of a youth alliance, Young Universities for the Future of Europe, and there is a citizen portal that actually allows direct contact within citizens and higher education institutions within the alliance. And this is really an interesting way of hearing the voices of our citizens in a way that I can communicate various community issues that they think need to be addressed. And this also comes as a quite reality check for our universities as well, and for the University of Rijeka, to see whether through our teaching, research, and various community engaged activities, we are really targeting those issues that our citizens think need to be addressed. There is, for example, a university for the third age that is like super popular at our university. There are mishmashes of various educational programs for the silver generation. And three more examples that I want to share. There is another course called Students and Community, which is a community-based teaching and learning course that serves as a platform for all the students that are engaged in various community-based projects, and they can get 3 ECTS points for their engagement. Out of all those centers that I mentioned before, I want to sort of give a special tribute to the Stepri Education Center for its numerous and various educational and consulting activities targeting students, scientists, employed and unemployed people, but aiming to improve entrepreneurial competencies in both existing and those wannabe entrepreneurs. And there is one really a great example of collaboration between university and various kindergartens in the city. It's called Magical Science Day, which is a collaborative project between Creative Team Campus and kindergartens in Rijeka. And it offers also a mix of short, active, creative, innovative, interactive science workshops that are particularly designed by the university professors and students, and are of course tailored for the preschool children. But if I need to be honest with all of you, for me, probably the most interesting part of the whole process was the external reviewers' slip dot analysis. Now that you know what slip dot analysis is, I don't need to explain this key difference between SWOT and slip dot, and I can sort of just focus on some of the results. So the peer review and those 4 external review members recognize these as areas of strength of community engagement at the University of Rijeka. So university leadership, they shared with us this feeling of university leadership being really supportive of the notion of community engagement, both in terms of policy, making it a strategic decision, and in various practices that have been taking place for some time at the university. Then there are students and academics that have been seen as an areas of strengths, because students are engaged in various projects. They do advocate community engagement a lot. And on the other side, there are already a lot of academics engaged that we were not even aware of. And some of them are like true community engagement champions, and some of the academics are heavily engaged in advocating community engagement to be better sort of institutionalized, and they are really engaged in working on its institutional sustainability. And I mentioned university centers before, which serve as a particular legal unit, and that various educational research, outreach, artistic activities taking place are designed to bridge this university community gap and to sort of nurture this collaborative reciprocity. However, there are, of course, areas of lower intensity and potential for development, and we were very much grateful for reviewers' analysis. So you can see leadership here again because of this particular cohort of people at a university governance level has been recognized as a very supportive one. The external review board raised the question of the community engagement sustainability and what could have, for example, happened if the current rector doesn't go into a second mandate, or if this whole group of people actually leaves the rectorate. This is very much related with their comments on center and periphery. The review members were analyzing the relationship between what's going on in terms of the leadership, the supportive leadership and various policies at a university level, and what's going on actually at a faculty and department level, which is kind of a periphery. And they noticed that actually there is not the same dynamic of resources, of supportiveness of the institution at those different levels. Again, the reviewers were very much in front of what the university has done already, and they sort of gave us an advice to try to use it in a strategic positioning and attracting students. And again, university centers are seen as those units that obviously have even more potential for development. And let me just finish with some key messages from someone who has been actually part of the whole piloting process, like from the beginning of the TEFCE project. And I was, as an expert member, engaged in creating the toolbox, up to the member of the piloting team that actually went throughout the whole process in every single phase. We really do believe that this toolbox is comprehensive, and institutions really can learn a lot about what's going on actually at the university. We can learn a lot, and we did learn a lot about the wealth of engagement activities that are already existing at our university. What is really important, and we truly do believe that the TEFCE Toolbox allows for the context-specific application. So we really were able to acknowledge our institutional and community context, both internal, external factors included. I think that you already could got this idea about the participatory element of the process. And this whole process was very participative and really allowed various participants' voices to be heard, from university management, right, to the community members that participated in focus groups. And I mean, they shared their experience quite openly with us, and they told us that they really appreciated the opportunity to be part of it, and that they felt empowered as well. Another thing is that we truly do believe, after being engaged in this whole process, that it is a holistic and developmental. It simply cannot result in a narrow scoring exercise. When you keep receiving all those narratives, all those stories, right, coming from the field, it doesn't matter whether are related with teaching, research, or any kind of outreach activities, you really have the idea of a certain qualitative aspects of what is going on at your university, and of the richness and diversity of forms and ways in which university collaborates with the community. And for the end, really, this process allowed us as an institution as well, and me personally, of course, to learn a lot about the potential for development. So the University of Rijeka is at this point, in this particular moment, like where to go from here, and how to go from here. We have certain ideas, but I think I'm gonna now end my presentation with this slide, and I want to thank you for your attention, and of course all your comments, suggestions, and questions are more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bojana, for this very passionate account of the experience of piloting the TEFCE Toolbox at the University of Rijeka. Having myself participated in 2 peer visits at 2 piloting institutions within the TEFCE project, I can say that it's a very enriching learning experience, right? I will now ask Thomas and Josep Maria to join us for the discussion, because we have many interesting questions. We won't be able to answer all of them, but let's see what can we do. In the meantime, Bojana, I wanted to ask you also, now that you have used the toolbox, do you think your university will want to continue using it in the future? How to ensure it doesn't just remain a one-off event?
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you for that. Yeah, we do intend to use it in the future. We already had several meetings with the university rector and some other stakeholders as well at a level of university management. And at our university, we think that we think that it's going to work for our case, of course, to make it a part of what is called institutional research. So University of Rijeka is doing various analysis every single academic year that are related with, student satisfaction and academic satisfaction and all different kind of aspects of their experience at this particular higher education institution. And we were discussing actually the possibility of the community engagement analysis becoming part of the institutional research. So we were discussing actually even the issue of setting up a certain team of people, that would be devoted. We are still in a phase of discussing, but there are some quite concrete ideas actually where to go now from here that we feel quite confident enough and empowered enough after all this process that, we could do it.
Yeah, thank you, Bojana. Thank you. Let's see our participants. We have here a question from David. He's asking, how would you distinguish your approach from the Carnegie classification system for community engagement? Maybe Thomas, you could answer this question?
Sure. Thank you. I actually put a comment in the box because I read all the questions during Bojana's presentation. There's loads of really good questions. So what I'm hoping is that if we don't have the time to answer them all, we can even provide some answers via email after this webinar. My answer to this one, thank you, David, for your question. And there was also some questions about how this is distinguished from the NCCPE, so a tool in the UK, and also from HE Innovate. And the answer is that there are some similarities. This is clear, and we really did analyze in detail the Carnegie classification tool, the NCCPE tool, other tools by Campus Engage and other organizations. There's some similarities thematically, but really in terms of methodologically, we're doing things in a slightly different way. We're a bit more critical in terms of what we accept as being good engagement or not, and we try and be a bit more participative in the process. And it really is, at the end of the day, a developmental tool to help the university improve, which is obviously also the case, I'm sure, for Carnegie classification and SCP, but they award quality labels. So there's also some other motivations that come into that process. So I would say a lot of similarities, but still different. And I wouldn't say whether it's better or worse, it's just a different approach.
Thank you, Thomas. And regarding the toolbox itself, we have here Alicia Betts, who is asking, can an institution use this tool without any support from the TEFCE, or does the toolbox require an expert in community engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I can quickly take that too. It's a really good question, and it's a question that we discussed at our project meeting just 3 weeks ago. And the conclusion was that obviously we're going to make this open access. So at the end of the day, really, whoever chooses to use Toolbox can do it. And there were also some questions about when it's going to be available. Well, I'm hoping in September. So it's going to be soon, but we do have to just finalize it. Ideally, what would happen is that it is it's a difficult process in the sense that it does benefit from getting mentorship and advice in the process. And what we would like to do, I mean, our project will probably be, we're going to extend it, so it should be asking for another 8 months. No, sorry, for another 12 months So we, during the project, will still be available to provide support to those who'd be interested to just have a look at it and for advice. And we're hoping after the end of the project that we'll also set up a kind of a network of people who've been involved in TEFCE and in the toolbox who will remain committed to helping other universities apply it and providing support to them in that process. Thank you, Thomas.
You have answered another interesting question by Kim. So yeah, there's going to be a setting up of a network of interested universities, right, on the TEFCE Toolbox. So how can universities express their interest? Should they contact the team? What should the universities do if they want to try the toolbox or pilot it?
Sure. I think that the best thing is to, I'm just going to write the project website here, and they can find our contacts on the TEFCE.eu website and contact us, and yeah, we will definitely support them in whatever way we can. So in the next 12 months, if anyone's interested to try this out at your universities, we can be available to support you to some extent in that process.
Good. I'm sure there will be many universities interested in the toolbox. And here's a question that maybe Bojana can answer. How and when the communities participate in this process?
Mm-hmm. Well, in our case, and this is something that I would actually sort of advise people to do, we were including community representatives in every single phase. So there were a couple of persons that were part of the larger piloting team at the University of Rijeka. And then when there was a piloting visit for those 2 days, we invited community member representatives that were already collaborating with the university on certain teaching courses or other projects to present their projects to the reviewers. That was one, actually kind of the second part. And the third part, which I think was the most important and substantial, and that we all enjoyed very much because it's not happening a lot, was during the focus groups. So there were members of a community, either NGOs or the local authorities or different kind of institutions that we managed to get at a university, and they were part of this 2 days discussion process, and their insights were really, really valuable. And this is why I think I kind of felt throughout the whole process that was really, really an interesting moment, that in terms of the self-assessment of university is not a case that you can hear a lot about that's happening around.
Yeah, this is something that we experienced also during the peer visits, and it's really interesting to get the chance to hear the people working in the community. There is a question here for Josep Maria. Josep Maria, are there any current projects related to community engagement and sustainability that GUNi is involved in with any of the universities in Catalonia or worldwide?
Yes, thank you, Victoria. Yes, of course. When we are participating in any European project or international project, we normally involve some universities, of course, as TEFCE could be an example, but in some others. At this moment, if I'm not wrong, we are participating in a couple of European projects, especially with on climate change and co-creation, where some universities from everywhere are participating, also from here, from Catalonia, and from the rest of Spain. So yes, our idea is to collaborate with so many institutions as we can, of course, within our own network of GUNi members as well. So I would advise you, or I would suggest you to visit our web and to let's go through and find the different projects.
Thank you very much, Josep Maria. I think our time is up for today.
I might try and just answer one question if I may.
Yeah, of course.
There was a couple of questions. Barbara Coelho, hi Barbara, good to see you again. I know it's Tony Gallagher as well. Thank you for your questions. There was one about leadership and governance, and about saying leadership and governance is crucial. And is it considered the profile of the person for leading and managing beyond their position in the higher education? And then Tony was asking whether engaging in a process like this, does it help to change the ethos and priorities of higher education institutions? And how can this change be embedded in the institution? So one thing that was that we felt was really interesting in this process is that community engagement takes place sometimes, maybe even often, despite what the university management sets as its priorities. And that's what we saw in a lot of cases. So for example, the Technological University of Dresden, very tech-driven, very entrepreneurship-driven, very innovation-driven, community engagement was nowhere on their priority. And yet, we found lots of different areas in which there was real, genuine community engagement taking place. It was more scattered, it wasn't as developed, but it was definitely there. And a process like this then shows that community engagement exists whatever happens in a range of different universities, but that you can also use that as a way to try and then start a conversation at the university, which is what we're going to be doing in the autumn in Dresden, to see whether that can influence providing more support and more priority to these kinds of organizations. So it's an interesting link between leadership, management, and then community engagement. Obviously, it can exist without, but you obviously would need to consolidate community engagement. You would need the support in the long term of management. But we think a toolbox like this, if it is driven from the bottom up, can still try and make that kind of change. Thanks, Victoria. I hope I didn't take
thanks
too
to
much
you,
time.
Thomas. I think what we can do is to gather all the questions that we couldn't answer now, right? And we can send some answers
Sure.
via email, because there are many interesting questions that are unanswered now. So I just would like to thank you all, to thank our speakers, Bojana, Thomas, Josep Maria, for your time, for your inputs, your ideas. I think we've had a very interesting webinar and discussion. And thanks to all of our participants also that connected from around the world. Please remember that the video of the webinar will be available on the TEFCE and GUNi websites and channels. We will try to upload it as soon as possible. And also we will send you an email with the materials and also hopefully the answers. And do not hesitate to contact us if you have any further comments or questions. Thank you so much to all of you, and looking forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.